Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. If you're new here, this is the channel where we sit down with Western men who came to this country looking for something. Love, a second act, a way to start over, and hear what actually happened to them. Not the brochure version, the real one. Today's story belongs to a man named Dwayne Halverson, 59 years old, from Elko, Nevada, which is about as far from Manila as you can get, and still be on the same planet. 31 years working drilling rigs, the Gulf of Mexico first, then the North Dakota oil fields. 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, for 3 decades. The kind of work that builds a man's hands and hollows out everything else. Now, I want to be careful with how I set this one up, because Dwayne's story is not the story you think it is. He wasn't robbed. Nobody ran off with his bank card. There's no moment in this where a woman vanishes with a suitcase full of cash. What happened to Dwayne was slower than that, and honestly, stranger. And by the end of it, he still couldn't tell you the name of the person who wronged him, because he's not sure anybody did. What I can tell you is that he arrived in this country carrying something he'd been carrying for 3 years, and he found a place that seemed to know exactly what to do with it. For a while, it felt like the answer. That's the part that's going to stick with you. Before we get into it, after hearing so many of these stories on this channel, we put together a guide covering the patterns we keep seeing come up. It's linked in the description if you want it. That's all I'll say about it. Here's Dwayne's story, in his own words. I worked my first hitch in 1993, out of Morgan City, Louisiana. 26 years old, no idea what I was doing, and a driller named Wendell put me on the floor and told me the only thing that mattered was where my hands were when the pipe was moving. That was the whole education. Where are your hands? I did that for 31 years. Gulf first. Then when the shale thing hit, I went north and worked the Bakken out of Williston. 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. You live in a man camp, you eat what they put in front of you, you sleep in bursts, and then you drive home and you're a stranger in your own house for 14 days, and then you go back. I never married. People ask me that, and I give them a joke about it, but the honest answer is, I don't fully know. There were women. There was one in particular, Cheryl, in about 99, and I thought that was going to be it. And then I took a hitch in the Gulf that ran long, and when I got back, she'd made other arrangements. I didn't fight it. That's the thing I notice about myself, looking at it now. I didn't fight it. Here's what 31 years of rotation teaches you. And nobody says it out loud, but every man on that crew knows it. Your job is to be somewhere else, making money, and send it back. That's love. That's the whole expression of it. You're not at the birthday. You're not at the funeral. But the check clears, and the check is you. I sent money to my mother every month from 1994 until she died. Never once sat and had a proper conversation with her. Not one. But that check went out on the 1st. Okay. So, 2021. There was a fella I'd worked 2 hitches with up in North Dakota. Name doesn't matter. He's not a criminal. That's the aggravating part. He got into the services side, and he had a placement. That's what he called it, a placement, which I now understand is a word people use when they don't want to say investment, because investment implies risk. Oilfield Services Company, real outfit, real trucks, real yard in Dickinson. He showed me photos, and he used the word guaranteed. I still can't, I'm going to be honest with you, I still can't say that word without something happening in my chest. Guaranteed. He said it maybe 4 times in that conversation. And I heard it 4 times, And every time it went in a little deeper. $340,000. That was 31 years. That was every hitch, every Christmas I missed, every rotation where I flew back on the 26th. That was the whole thing, and I put it in on a handshake and a term sheet I read maybe half of because I didn't want him to think I didn't trust him. The company was real. The returns weren't. It took about 11 months to fall apart, and about 18 more for the letters to stop coming. And at the end of it, I had a paid-off double-wide outside Elko, a 2014 F-250, and $19,000. 57 years old. Now here's the part. One wants you to understand, because if you understand this, you understand everything else that happened to me afterward. I didn't tell anybody. Not my sister Karen in Reno, who I talk to every couple weeks. Not one person. What I did instead was, I stopped going to the Elks. Thursday nights, I'd gone for years. It wasn't anything. It was 6 or 7 guys and a bad steak and somebody complaining about the county. And I just stopped. Because I could not sit across a table from Wendell's brother-in-law and have him say, "Hey, Dwayne, how you been?" and have to answer that. That's what shame does. It doesn't make you sad. It makes you unavailable. I described it to somebody once as a toothache. Not the kind that drops you. The kind you've had for so long that you've reorganized how you chew. You forget it's there, and then you bite down wrong, and there it is, same as always. So that was 2022, 2023. Man in a trailer, doing some consulting work, a little bit of safety training for a company out of Salt Lake, drawing enough to get by, waiting on Social Security like it was a bus. My mother died January of 2024. Winnemucca. She'd been going for a while. The last part was quick. And the funeral was, I don't know what I expected. Karen handled most of it. I stood at the front in a suit that didn't fit anymore, and people came up and said she was proud of me, which I don't know what she was proud of exactly, but that's what you say. Then there's this whole administrative part of somebody dying that nobody warns you about. Probate. The house on Malarkey Street with the swamp cooler. A life insurance policy from 1988 that she'd kept paying on, $40 a month, for 36 years, because she was that kind of person. It took until about the middle of February, and then one morning I looked at my account on the phone, standing in the kitchen of the trailer with the coffee going, and there was $127,000 in it. That account had never had 4 figures in it. Not once. Money came in and money went out. To the mortgage, to the truck, to my mother, to whoever needed it. Money was something that moved. And now here was this pile of it, just sitting there, not doing anything, not going anywhere. I stood in that kitchen for a long time, and I remember thinking, and this is a genuinely stupid thought, but it's the one I had. I remember thinking, who's this for? So I did nothing with it for about 3 weeks. That's the honest answer. I looked at the number every morning like it was a weather report, and then I went and did whatever I was doing, which in February in Elko is mostly nothing. Karen called a couple times, asked what I was going to do with Mom's money. I said I was thinking about it. She said I should put it somewhere sensible. And I said, yeah. And neither of us said the word that was actually sitting in the room, which was that I'd already put money somewhere, and it had gone. She still doesn't know about that, by the way, to this day. Anyway, there was a kid on my last crew. Kid, he was 34, but everybody under 50 is a kid to me, named Tyler. Tyler married a girl from Cebu. He'd met her on Facebook of all things, some group about motorcycles or something, and by the time I knew him, they had 2 boys and a house in Minot. And she was the one who did the finances, because Tyler couldn't be trusted with a debit card. And he talked about that country the way you talk about a place you've already decided about. Not lying, just decided. He'd say things like, "Dwayne, you don't understand. Over there, family actually means something." He'd say, "Over there, they're happy with nothing." He'd say, "Everybody speaks English. It's not like Thailand. You don't got to learn anything." That last part shouldn't have been a selling point. It was, though. Let's be honest about that. 57 years old, and the pitch that landed was that I wouldn't have to learn anything. But that wasn't the real reason. It took me about a year and a half to be able to say the real reason out loud. And I'm going to say it now because if you don't get this part, you won't understand a single decision I made after. In that country, a man who sends money home isn't a sucker. That's it. That's the whole thing. Over there, they've got, what, 10, 12 million people working overseas? Nurses in Riyadh, seamen on container ships, caregivers in Hong Kong, women cleaning houses in Dubai, and every one of them sends money back, and the money is the love. It's not embarrassing. It's not what you do instead of being there. It's what being a good person looks like. I'd spent 31 years doing exactly that, and my own culture had no word for it except absent father, except he was never around, except that guy who missed his mother's last Christmas. And I'd spent 3 years being ashamed of a wire transfer. So there was a place, apparently, where the thing I was good at was the thing that counted. I signed up on Christian Filipina in the middle of February. Not Filipino Cupid. I looked at that one, and maybe it's fine, but the whole feel of it made me itch. Christian Filipina had a slower speed to it. More questions on the profile. It cost money, which I took as a good sign, which is the kind of logic a man uses when he wants to do a thing. Now, if you've never done this, let me describe what it's actually like, because it's not what you picture. You put up a profile, 57-year-old American male, retired, Nevada. I had one decent photo from my nephew's wedding in 2018, where I looked like a man who owns a lawn. Within 4 days, I had somewhere north of 90 messages. 90. And I want to be clear that this is not flattering, it's disorienting, because a fair chunk of them are the same message. Word for word, sometimes. "Hello, sir. You look very kind. I am looking for a serious man." "Hello po. God bless you. I hope you are having a blessed day." 23-year-olds, 24-year-olds. Girls younger than my sister's kids sending heart emojis to a man with my face. Some of them were obviously not the person in the picture. You'd get a photo of somebody who belonged in a shampoo commercial, and then the English in the messages didn't match, or the timestamps were all wrong, or you'd ask a question and get an answer to a different question. There's a whole industry of that. I knew about it going in, from the videos, from the forums. I read a lot of forums those 3 weeks. Way too many. And here's the part 1,000 oddly proud of. Given everything else, I was careful. I really was. I had a rule that I wouldn't talk to anybody under 40. I broke it once, for Marilyn, who was 38, and that was the entire extent of my recklessness in month 1. She messaged me on the 9th of March. I know the date because it's still in the app. It wasn't a good message. That's what I liked. It said something like, I'm paraphrasing, "You said you worked on oil rigs. My uncle worked on a ship for 14 years, and we only saw him at Christmas. Is it like that? Was your family okay with it?" Nobody had ever asked me that. Not once. Not in 31 years. Marilyn Bandoja, 38. From a barangay outside Katarman in northern Samar, living in a boarding house in Caloocan, and working the counter at a Mercury Drug in one of the SM malls. Eldest of 5. 2 years in Dubai when she was 24, working at a perfume counter, sent every dirham home. Our first video call ran 4 hours. 4 hours. I hadn't talked to anybody for 4 hours in my life. She was up on the roof of the boarding house because the signal was better up there, sitting on a plastic stool with laundry strung behind her on a line, and somewhere below there was a rooster going off at completely the wrong time of day, and a neighbor doing karaoke. Badly. Some air supply thing. And every so often she'd have to shout over it and laugh. She had a chipped front tooth, left side. She never got it fixed the whole time I knew her, even when there was money. I asked her about it once, and she said something about it being the tooth her father knocked loose teaching her to ride a bicycle. And that was the end of that conversation. Not beautiful exactly. That's not the right word. There was just something in her face that didn't perform. And now I want to tell you about the 11 weeks, because this is the part that mattered. March 9th to about the end of May. 11 weeks of good morning messages and evening calls, and me eating dinner at 4 in the afternoon so it'd be breakfast time in Manila. 11 weeks, and she did not ask me for 1 peso. I was watching for it. Understand that. I had been taken for $340,000 by a man in a Carhartt jacket, and I was not going to be taken again. So I was watching that woman like a hawk on a fence post. Every conversation, I'm waiting for the pivot. The sick auntie. The phone that broke. The tuition. Never came. She asked about the rigs. She asked what snow felt like. She'd genuinely never touched it. And I sent her a video of my truck buried in the driveway, and she watched it 4 times. She asked about my mother. She asked what I ate. She sent me a photo of the pharmacy counter one afternoon, just the counter, no filter, fluorescent light, and a stack of receipt rolls, captioned, "My office, sir, haha." She still called me sir sometimes. Took months to break her of it. Around week 7, I offered to send her a better phone because hers was dropping the calls, and it was driving me crazy. She said no, not a coy no, a fast, almost sharp no, and she changed the subject, and later that night she said, "I don't want you to think that's why." I hung up from that call and sat in the dark in the trailer feeling something I hadn't felt in probably 15 years. The last week of May, my whole day was built around a time zone 16 hours ahead of me. I was setting alarms. I was checking the weather in Caloocan. I want you to hold on to that before we get to the rest of it. Nobody tricked me into caring. I got there entirely under my own power. It came at the end of May. Week 11. And it didn't come as a request. That's the thing I keep having to explain to people. She mentioned it, and then she moved off it, the way you'd mention weather. We were on a call, and she looked wrung out. And I asked, and she said her father was starting dialysis at a clinic in Katarman. Kidney failure. Both of them. Gone bad over about 4 years the way they do when nobody's been checking. And then she said something about the price of the jeepney fare from the barangay, and started talking about a customer at the pharmacy who'd tried to return an expired antihistamine. I had to go back and get it. Twice, actually. She kept sliding off. 3rd time I said, "Marilyn, how much is the dialysis?" She said, "Per 3,500 a session. That's about $63. And I said, "How many sessions?" And she said, "Well, 3 a week is what they recommend. But they were doing 2, and sometimes 1, depending. Depending." That word sat in my chest for a while. Then I did what any American does, which is start solving. I said, "Okay, so that's $42,000 a month, call it $760, and she stopped me. She got upset. Not theatrical upset. She put her hand over her mouth and her eyes went and she said, "I'm not telling you so you'll do something. I'm telling you because you asked me what's wrong and I don't want to lie to you." And then she cried. From embarrassment. Not the pretty kind of crying either. The kind where your face goes wrong and you're angry at yourself for doing it. I've thought about that a lot since. I've turned that particular 90 seconds over more than any other 90 seconds of the whole thing. Because here's what I know now that I didn't know then. She was probably telling the truth about all of it. The shame was real. The dialysis was real. It's just that real and useful aren't opposites. I sent P15,000 that night through Remitly. $270 roughly. Took me about 4 minutes, and I'd like to tell you I agonized over it, and I didn't. I did it standing at the kitchen counter. Next morning, there was a photo waiting. The receipt from the clinic. Actual receipt, on that thin paper, photographed on a plastic table with a bottle of Datu Puti in the corner of the frame. She hadn't asked me if I wanted it. She just sent it. I want you to understand what that did to me. For 3 years, I had been a man who put $340,000 into a hole in the ground and never got so much as a postcard. No receipt, no photo, nothing to look at. Just a number that used to be there and then wasn't, and a shame I'd stopped even noticing, like a bad tooth. And here was P15,000 turning into an old man on a machine in Caterman, and there was a piece of paper to prove it. That's the whole story right there, honestly. Everything after is just arithmetic. We set up the monthly thing in June, and she set the number, not me. That's another one of those details I hang on to. I offered P40,000, and she said absolutely not. She sat there with a calculator on her phone and worked it out against what she made at Mercury Drug, which was about P16,000 a month. And she said P25,000, about $450. I pushed. She said no again, harder. She said, if you give me more than I need, then I'm something else. She didn't finish that sentence, and I didn't make her. So P25,000 a month it was. That covered her boarding house, her food, her fare, and left enough to send home for the dialysis with the family topping up from the sari-sari store her mother runs out of the front of their house. Cigarettes by the stick, sachets of shampoo, that kind of operation. Her brother Jomar was doing some kind of hauling work. Rowena, the sister, was between things, and she told me about all of it. This is where I got my education in that country, and it came from her, not from a video. She explained utang na loob to me one night. The debt you owe someone for kindness, which isn't a debt in dollars, it's a debt in the actual person, and it doesn't expire. She explained that, as the eldest daughter, she'd been carrying that family since she was 19. Dubai at 24, 2 years at a perfume counter, in a mall in Dera, 70-hour weeks, sent home every dirham she could, and came back with nothing but a suitcase and a scar on her wrist from a display case. I remember sitting there listening to that and thinking, this is me. Different currency. Same job. She stood at a counter in a hot country selling perfume to strangers so her family could eat, and I stood on a drilling floor in North Dakota at 40 below so my mother could keep her house, and neither one of us ever went to a single birthday party. 2 people who only knew one language. You put 2 people like that together, and it doesn't feel like a transaction. It feels like recognition. It felt like the first time in my life somebody understood the arrangement I'd made with the world. I flew over in September, first week. Philippine Airlines out of Los Angeles, 13.5 hours, and I hadn't been on a plane since 2016. You come out of NAIA Terminal 2, and the heat gets you before the door does. It's not Nevada heat. Nevada heat is an oven. This is a wet towel over your face. Diesel and something frying, and about 400 people at the barrier holding signs and phones. She was there. And so was her Auntie Belen. I want you to appreciate what a 57-year-old man feels in that moment. I'd flown 8,000 miles to meet a woman off the internet, and she'd brought a chaperone. A 60-something woman in a floral blouse who looked me up and down like she was pricing a carabao. 2 rooms at the hotel in Ermita. Marilyn had booked them. 2. I didn't share a room with her until the third night, and even then Auntie Belen made a whole production of going to her sister's in Pasig, saying goodbye about 4 separate times. Old-fashioned is the word I used at the time. It felt old-fashioned. It felt like something from before everything got cheap. That first week, we didn't do anything. We rode a jeepney because I wanted to, and she thought it was hilarious. This big Kano folded up in there with his knees at his chin, passing coins forward down the line. We ate at a Mang Inasal near her boarding house, and she taught me to eat with my hands, and laughed at me for about 20 minutes straight. There was karaoke going somewhere every single night. Always Air Supply. I still can't hear that band. She took me to Mercury Drug and introduced me to the girls at the counter, and every one of them called me sir and giggled, and Marilyn stood there next to me with her chin up. And I met the aunt, and the aunt's neighbors, and a cousin, and a man who fixed motorcycles, who was somebody's godfather. I flew home on the 14th of September. On the plane, I made a decision. And I made it up there over the Pacific with 2 little bottles of Jack in me, which is not where you should make decisions. I decided I'd go see the clinic myself next time. That's how it started. That's honestly how it started. Not with a lie, not with a scam. With me deciding I wanted to look at the machine my money was buying. I got back to Elko on the 15th of September, and the trailer was cold, and there was a dead mouse in the trap under the sink, and I stood there in my coat, thinking about a Mang Inasal. That's the honest report of my re-entry. Everything in Nevada had gotten quiet, in a way I hadn't noticed before I left. November, I went back. 10 days, and this time we went out to Samar. Cebu Pacific to Calbayog, then 3 hours in a van on a road that's mostly patches, past rice and coconut, and about 9,000 basketball courts. Every barangay in that country has a basketball court, and half of them are nicer than the school. And I saw the clinic. It's not a hospital. It's a converted commercial building in Caterman, with an aircon unit dripping down the front of it and 8 chairs, and a nurse named Joy, who's about 26 and runs the whole floor. Her father, Tatay Ernesto, and I want to say his name because he was a real man, not a line item, was in the 3rd chair with a tube in his arm and a towel over his lap. And he'd been going twice a week because that's what they could afford. He shook my hand with the arm that wasn't hooked up, called me sir. Everybody in that family called me sir for about a year. So I moved it to 3 sessions. That's $45,000 a month with the meds and the fare and the sundries, around $780. I didn't discuss it with Marilyn. I just told her it was happening. And she cried in the van on the way back and said thank you about 40 times. And I felt like the biggest man in the province. That's the trip where it stopped being $25,000 a month and started being something else. I also got her out of the boarding house that trip. Small place in Caloocan, 2nd floor, 1 bedroom and a little balcony where the aircon compressor was, $14,000 a month, about $250. I framed it as practical. She's got a bathroom of her own. She's not sharing a hallway with 9 people. She can leave her stuff out. And it was practical. It was also a leash, and I knew it wasn't a leash. And I told myself so twice, which is how you know a man's thinking about something he doesn't want to think about. Now here's the shift, and this is the part 1 want anybody watching to actually hear. After November, the requests stopped coming from Marilyn. They started coming through her. That's a different thing. She'd be on a call and she'd say, "My mother is asking," or "Rowena wants to know if you would consider." And her face would be doing something apologetic the whole time. She was the phone line. She wasn't the one dialing. Rowena first. The sister, 29, had 2 years of a nursing degree in Caterman, and stopped when the money stopped. And the university would let her come back. $180,000 for the rest of it, about $3,100, and I paid it in 2 chunks. One in December, one the following June. And I want to be clear because I know how this sounds. Rowena enrolled. She actually enrolled. I've got the photo of her in the white uniform with the little cap, standing in front of the house with her arms straight down at her sides like she's in trouble. She passed her boards in 2026. She's working in Cebu now. That money did exactly what it was supposed to do. Then Jomar, the youngest brother, 24, wanted a motorcycle so he could do delivery work in Caterman. The food apps had come to the province, and there was money in it if you had a bike. P95,000, about $1,700, a Honda, second-hand, but decent. And he drove it. He drove it for a year and a half. I'd get photos of him in the little insulated backpack looking pleased with himself. Nobody stole from me. I want to hammer that in. Not 1 peso in this entire story went anywhere other than exactly where they said it would go. That's what makes it hard to talk about. Then it started coming from further out. There was a generator. Their barangay had brownouts. Not the Manila kind where it flickers, the kind where it's out for 11 hours and everybody's chest freezer defrosts. P38,000 for a decent one, plus fuel. And it lived at their house, but it ran the sari-sari store and about 4 neighbors' phones and the karaoke machine for the fiesta. There was pasalubong, every single trip. And that's not a small thing over there. You don't come back from somewhere without gifts. It's not greed. It's just how you demonstrate that you thought about people while you were gone. But the list grew. First trip, it was chocolate for the household. 4th trip, I was hauling 2 duffel bags of Hershey's and Spam and Costco vitamins and body spray and a pair of Skechers for somebody's godmother. Balikbayan boxes between visits. $500 to ship one, about $80, and you fill it with whatever fits, and you send one at Christmas, and one whenever there's a reason. February 2025. 2nd summer trip. They put me at the head of the table. I hadn't said a word. I walked into that house, concrete block and plywood and a corrugated roof, a rooster tied to a post out front, the smell of somebody frying fish. And there were maybe 22 people in a room built for 8. And Tatay Ernesto stood up and moved down a chair, and they sat me at the head with a plate of lechon in front of me and a San Miguel already sweating. There were children I had never met calling me Tito, Uncle, 2 little girls who followed me around the whole 4 days. And I'm going to be honest with you. I loved it. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I felt trapped. I felt located. 58 years old, and I had a place at a table, which I'm not sure I'd ever had. Within an hour of arriving, a cousin, Marilyn's mother's brother's daughter, I think, I never got it straight, asked me about tuition for her boy. Straight out, smiling, no shame about it at all. And Marilyn shot her a look that could have taken paint off a truck. I told myself that look meant something. It did mean something. It meant Marilyn was embarrassed. What it did not mean, and what I chose not to work out, is that Marilyn being embarrassed didn't stop it from being asked, and it wasn't going to stop the next one either. I think about the head of the table a lot. That's the moment, if you want one. Not a lie, not a scam, just a chair. By June of 2025, I sat down and figured my monthly. P45,000 dialysis, P25,000 to her, P14,000 rent. Then, whatever the month brought, a roof repair, a fiesta, somebody's tooth, a laptop for a nephew doing online classes. About $1,900 a month, steady, against Social Security that hadn't started yet, and $127,000 that was now about 94. I knew that number. I want to be clear that I knew it. I just filed it under money coming in later, the way you do, and I didn't put it on paper. And there's a reason I didn't put it on paper. And it's the same reason I never opened those investment statements in 2021. If you don't look at the number can't say anything to you. The house came up in July of 2025, and it didn't come up as a request either. It came up as a plan, which is worse, because a plan you get to be part of. We were sitting on the balcony of the Kalu Khan place, with the compressor rattling next to us, and a San Miguel each, and she said her father wasn't going to get better. And when he goes, her mother can't stay in that house, because the roof's gone soft on the west side, and the land is theirs. The family's, going back to her grandfather. And if there were a proper house on it, everybody would be fine. Her mother, the kids, us. She said us. And I heard myself say, well, how much would that be? Now, I want to walk you through the legal side, because this is the part everybody watching already knows and I did not. A foreigner cannot own land in the Philippines. Full stop. Not with a workaround, not with a good lawyer, not because you paid for it. You can own a condominium unit. Up to 40% of a building can be foreign-owned, but the ground itself, no, never. It's in their constitution. I actually did the responsible thing, sort of. I went and saw a lawyer in Manila, an office in Makati, a woman about 45 with a diploma from Ateneo on the wall and an aircon set to Arctic. 2 hours, $8,000, about $145. She was completely straight with me. She said, you cannot own it. She said, if you build on her family's land, you are making a gift. She said, you can do a long-term lease on the land, 25 years renewable, registered, that's a real thing, that's legitimate. Or you cannot build at all. She said, and I remember this because of how flat she said it, sir, many men in your position build anyway. I said I'd think about the lease. I never did the lease. I want to be honest about why, because it wasn't stupidity. It was that bringing a lease document to that family would have been an accusation. It would have said, out loud, in front of everybody, I think you might rob me. And in a culture where nobody says the hard thing directly, where you'd rather let something rot for 10 years than embarrass a person at a table, I'd have been the Kano who came in with paperwork. I couldn't do it. I told myself I'd do it later, after the wedding, when it'd be normal. 2.4 million pesos in the end. About $41,000 spread over 18 months. It didn't start at 2.4. It started at P1.4 million, which the cousin, Boye, who does construction in Katarman and had built maybe 9 houses, laid out on graph paper with a pencil. Concrete hollow block, 2 bedrooms plus a room for the parents, tile floors, a real CR with a proper septic, corrugated roof. I released it in tranches. That was my one piece of discipline, and I'm still proud of it in a small, pathetic way. 200,000, then 250,000, then more when there were photos. And the photos came. That's the thing. There were always photos. Foundation poured, October. Block up to window height, December. My phone from that period is full of a Filipino man in a Lakers jersey standing next to rebar, giving me a thumbs up. Then, cement went up. That's real, by the way. Anybody in the provinces will tell you. Prices moved on us. Then the sand had to come further because a supplier closed. Then Boye said the original plan wouldn't pass for the second floor, and we needed heavier posts, which, fine. I'm not going to argue structure with a man who builds things. And then November 2025, a typhoon came through Samar. Not a monster, not a Yolanda, just an ordinary one, And Samar gets ordinary ones the way Elko gets snow. And it took most of the temporary roofing off and put water through everything that wasn't cured. $310,000 to fix, about $5,600. The work stopped every time a tranche ran out, which is how construction works there, and I understand that now, but at the time I read it as urgency. If I don't send, the men go home, and if the men go home, the rain gets in, and if the rain gets in, I've wasted what I already spent. That's the machine. That's the whole machine right there. You're not spending money because you want the house. You're spending money because you already spent money. Meanwhile, and this happened in September of 2025, in between all that, I moved over full-time. Gave up the trailer. Didn't sell it, my nephew's in it now, but I packed 2 bags and I went. And I did it on tourist extensions, which is what most guys do, and it works fine, but it's a treadmill. You go into the Bureau of Immigration office, you queue, you pay your P3000 or P4000, you do it again in a month or 2 months. You can keep that up for up to 3 years, and then you have to leave the country and come back and start over. There's a retirement visa, the SRRV, and I looked at it hard. At my age, the deposit is $10,000 that just sits in a Philippine bank, and it gets you permanent residency. I didn't do it. $10,000 locked in a bank doing nothing, when there was a house half up and a man on dialysis. Think about that decision for a second. That's the one that gets me. I had a choice between $10,000 that would have secured my legal right to be there and $10,000 of block and cement on land that could never be mine. And I chose the cement. Because the cement made somebody happy that week. So, September 2025 onward, I'm living in Manila. Small place in Mandaluyong, $22,000 a month, about $400. Total burn was running $2,800 to $3,200 a day some weeks when the house was going. Call it $2,800 to $3,200 a month all in. Some months worse. And here's the crack. This is where it starts. She wasn't there. I moved 8,000 miles to be in the same city as this woman, and she was in Samar 3 weeks out of 4. Because her father was dying, which is true. Because the house needed somebody watching Boye, which is also true. Because her mother couldn't be alone, true again. Every single reason was real. I have never once been able to point at one and say that one was a lie. But I'd fly to Manila and sit in an apartment in Mandaluyong, listening to a neighbor's kid practice the same 8 bars on a keyboard, and we'd talk on video at 9 at night, and I'd think, I know this. I have done this exact thing before. This is a hitch. I came here so I'd stop being the man on the other end of the phone, and I had become the man on the other end of the phone. The marriage thing kept sliding, too. First, it was after Papa's next round of treatment. Then it was, we should wait until the house is done, so the reception can be there. Then there was something about her mother's health, and the church, and a schedule. Every reason reasonable. Every reason a delay. And Jomar started in around Christmas. Little comments at first, in that joking way, where nobody's joking. Something about how Boyette's family had a new refrigerator. Something about how some people get the contracts and some people get a motorcycle. I didn't follow it. I thought it was family stuff. And family stuff isn't a foreigner's business. By January 2026, there was a 2/3 finished concrete box in a rice field in northern Samar with rebar sticking up out of the columns, waiting on a second floor that never came. And I'd put in about $71,000 total across everything. And I had not written a single number down. February 2026. A Tuesday, I think. There was a Bureau of Immigration run that morning, and I'd sat 3 hours for a stamp. Jomar showed up at the Mandaluyong place around 6. He'd come to Manila for something, some errand about the delivery app's registration, And he had 2 red horse in a plastic bag, and that look a young man gets when he's been carrying something around all day, waiting for somewhere to put it. I want to say this before I tell you what he said. Jomar was 24, and he was angry at his family, not at me. He'd wanted the contract on the house. He thought Boyed was skimming, and Boyed's family had a new refrigerator and a new roof of their own, and Jomar had a second-hand Honda and a backpack. He came to me because I was the only adult in that whole arrangement who wasn't inside it. We sat on the floor because there were no chairs yet. 2 red horse and a neighbor's karaoke going through the wall, some woman murdering a Whitney Houston song, and Jomar starts telling me about the family meeting. There'd been a meeting, back in 2024, before I ever flew over. Him, his mother, Rowena, Marilyn on speakerphone from Caloocan. And the subject of the meeting was me. Not in a criminal way. I need you to hear that, because everybody wants this to be the part where one find out it was all fake, and it wasn't. The subject of the meeting was, Marilyn has met an American. He seems serious. He seems kind. What does this mean for the family? And what should we ask for, and in what order? In what order? Jomar told me this like it was nothing. Like I already knew. He was using it as evidence in an argument about Boye. His point was that the order had been agreed, and then Boye had jumped the line. He wasn't confessing. There was nothing to confess. In his head, this was just how a family sits down and plans. And when I asked him, and I asked him carefully because my mouth had gone dry, I said, Jomar, does your sister love me? Or was this a plan? And he looked at me like I'd asked him whether water is wet or water is water. He said, Sir, of course she loves you. She takes care of everybody. That's the sentence. That's the one I've carried around for 5 months. Of course she loves you. She takes care of everybody. In his world, those weren't 2 different things, and I couldn't make them be 2 different things by asking harder. He drank his beer and went back to complaining about the refrigerator. Left about 9, gave me a hug at the door. I sat on that floor until about 2 in the morning, and then I did a thing I have avoided doing my entire adult life. I got the laptop out and I opened a spreadsheet. 22 months, September 2024 through February 2026, and the bits before that from May. Remitly, Wise, Gcash, the bank, the tranches, the pasalubong, the boxes, the flights, the visa fees, the rent on 2 apartments, the generator, the motorcycle, the tuition, the roof after the typhoon. It took me until 4:30 in the morning because I kept having to log into things. 81,200 and change, $81,000 out of 127. And here's the thing that actually broke me, and I want to be precise about it. It wasn't the number. I'd survived a bigger number. It was that when I went through every single line, every single one was legitimate. Not 1 peso missing. Not 1 invented emergency. Tatay Ernesto really was on that machine 3 times a week. I'd watched it. Rowena really did graduate. There's a photo of her in the white uniform. Jomar really did drive that bike. The house really is standing there, 2/3 of it, with rebar coming out the top. There was nobody to be angry at. You understand what I'm saying? A man can get over being robbed. Being robbed gives you somewhere to put it. I'd been robbed in 2021, and I still had somewhere to put it. I had a guy in a Carhartt jacket. To hate. This had no address. I told her the following week. She came in from Samar on the night bus and the ferry, and got to Manila looking like she'd been through a car wash. And I did not confront her. I want to be clear about that, because I know what people want out of a story like this. There was no shouting. I have never shouted at a woman in my life, which sounds like a virtue and isn't. It's the same disease as everything else. I just told her the facts. I said, here's the number. I said, I've got $46,000 left, and no pension until next year, and I'm on a tourist stamp. I said, I'm going to $20,000 a month, about $360, and I'm stopping the house where it is. She was quiet for a long time. And then she said, okay, that's all. And she went and washed the dishes that were already clean. Then, over about 3 days, it came apart in pieces. She cried. Then she was reasonable. Could we do P35,000? Just until after the rainy season, because if the house sits open, the block will spoil. Then she was hurt, in a way I think was completely real. She said, you think I made a fool of you. Then she said the thing that I still can't get around. She said, what am I supposed to tell them? Not what am I going to do? What am I supposed to tell them? Because that was her job. She was the eldest daughter. She'd been the eldest daughter since she was 19, in Dubai, at a perfume counter, and in Caloocan, behind a pharmacy counter, and on a video call to Nevada. And the job had never once changed. And I had just cut her supply. 6 weeks. That's how long it took. And they were polite weeks, which was somehow worse. She was in the apartment. She cooked. We watched things. But the good morning messages stopped being every morning. Rowena stopped messaging me entirely. That one stung more than I expected. I'd paid for that woman's degree, and she went quiet inside a fortnight. The family group chat I'd been added to, the one with 200 photos of children I'd never met, went silent. Nobody removed me. They just stopped talking in it. Saving face. Nobody says the hard thing. The hard thing just gets done quietly, and everyone keeps smiling until the day they're gone. She left on the 11th of May, 2026. Not to another man. I want that on the record, because I know what the comments will say. There was no other Kano. I've looked, honestly, in the small hours, and there's nothing. She went back to Samar, to her mother and her dying father, and a house with no second floor, and 5 people who needed her. She took 1 bag. She left the rice cooker. And the last message she sent me, she sent it from the ferry, said, thank you for everything you did for my family. And God bless you. And I'm sorry I'm not strong enough to do this properly. I've read that message probably 400 times, trying to decide if it's the truest thing anybody ever said to me, or the most expensive. I still don't know. I've stopped expecting to find out. So here's the accounting, and then I'll shut up. $81,000 over 22 months. $46,000 left, roughly, after I paid the last of the immigration fees and a dentist. Social Security kicks in when I turn 62, so I've got 2.5 years of thin living in front of me, and then about $20,100 a month for the rest of it, which in this country is a life. Not a big one. A life. There's a house in a rice field outside Katarman, northern Samar. 2/3 of one. Ground floor's closed in, tiles down in one room, and there's rebar sticking up out of the columns waiting for a second floor that isn't coming. It's in Marilyn's name because the land is her family's, and there was never any version of this where it wasn't. I couldn't sell it if I wanted to. I have no claim on it, legal or otherwise. I made a gift. That lawyer in Makati told me that in about the 3rd minute of a 2-hour meeting, and I paid $8,000 to not hear it. Her mother's living in it now. I'm told the roof leaks at the back. I'm in Mandaluyong still, smaller place, $13,000 a month, about $235, 3rd floor, no elevator, and there's a Pure Gold 2 streets over and a Carinderia on the corner where a woman named Nane Faye sells the best sinigang I've had in this country for P90. I cook for myself most nights. First time in probably 15 years. I'm on tourist extensions still, going in every couple months for the stamp, which is a stupid way to live, and I know it. I'll either do the SRRV when the pension starts, or I'll go back to Nevada. Haven't decided. Some days, I look at the flight prices and don't book anything. Tatay Ernesto died in April, before she left. I paid for the funeral, P95,000, about $1,700, and I don't regret 1 peso of that one, and I'd do it again tomorrow. Now, there's a thing that happens to men like me over here that I want to warn you about, because it nearly got me. About a month after she left, I ended up in a bar off Calayan in Makati with 3 or 4 other foreigners, guys my age, and they've all got the story. And the story has a shape, and the shape is, they're all like that, mate. Every one of them. You can't trust any of them. They see white skin, and they see an ATM. They wanted me in the choir. They were being kind in their way. That's how men that age welcome you. And I sat there with a San Miguel getting warm, and I found I couldn't do it. Because it's not my story. Nobody defrauded me. Not 1 peso in 22 months went anywhere other than where they said it was going. That man was really on dialysis. That girl really got her nursing degree. She's working in Cebu now, and I hope she's good at it, and I mean that. That motorcycle really delivered food. I funded a family, knowingly, voluntarily, for nearly 2 years, and then I stopped, and the arrangement ended. Because that's what arrangements do when the terms change. That's not a crime. That's arithmetic. So what did I actually get wrong? I've had a lot of quiet evenings to work on this. Here it is. 31 years on drilling floors taught me that provision is love. That's the only language I ever learned. My mother got a check on the first of every month for 30 years and never got a conversation. And I came to a country where that language is spoken fluently, where being the one who sends is honorable, where the whole culture is built on it. And I thought I'd finally found somewhere I could be understood. But I mistook infinite demand for infinite belonging. That's the sentence. That's what I paid $81,000 to learn. And here's the part that indicts me, not them. In 22 months, I never said no. Not once. Not to a single request. Not to the tuition. Not to the motorcycle. Not to the generator. Not to a cousin's kid's school shoes. Not one no. You can't blame people for asking when you've never once shown them there's a bottom. How would they know? I never told them. I never told anybody anything. I didn't tell my sister I'd lost $340,000, and I didn't tell that family that I was running out. Same disease. Same man. And nobody ever asked me to stay. I want to be careful how I say that, because it's the thing that actually hurts, and it isn't cruelty. It's just, nobody ever said, come to Samar and live with us and be broke with us. They asked me to send. That was the role. I took the role because it was the only one I knew how to play. And then I got sad that it was the only role available. So, practical. If you're a man watching this at 2 in the morning with a woman's photo open in another tab, here's what I've got. Pick your number before you feel anything. Write it on paper. A number you can pay every month for 10 years and still eat. Then tell her the number, out loud, early, when it's easy. Because it will never be easier than it is right now. Learn the difference between a legitimate request and a sustainable one. They are not the same question. Every request I got was legitimate. That's exactly why I lost. If you can't say no once, you will never say it at all. Practice on something small. And property. If you can't hold title to it, it's a gift. Not an investment, not a home, not security. A gift. So decide if you can afford to give it away, because you are giving it away, and then go do the lease anyway. Sign the paper. Yes, it's awkward. Awkward's cheaper than this. Would I do it again? I don't know. That's an honest answer, not a brave one. I know I'd do it smaller. I know I'd say the hard thing out loud at least once. But I sat at the head of a table in a house in Samar with 22 people in a room and 2 little girls calling me Tito. And I was 58 years old, and I had never in my life had a place at a table. I'm not going to pretend that was worth nothing just because it turned out to have a price. That's Dwayne. And I want to leave you with the thing that makes his story unusual, because it isn't the money. We've told stories on this channel about men who lost more and faster, and to people who were flatly lying to them. That's not what happened here. Every request Dwayne received was real. Every peso went where it was said to go. There's no villain to point at, and that's precisely why it took 22 months and $81,000 to notice anything was wrong. The family obligation spiral is the quietest one we cover, and it catches good men more often than the scams do. It isn't a con. It's a collision between a culture where support for family genuinely has no ceiling and a Western man who arrives with a finite bank account, no vocabulary for saying no, and often, like Dwayne, a private reason for wanting to be needed. Both sides can be acting in complete good faith, and it still ends with an empty account and a half-built house. The lesson isn't don't help. Dwayne paid for a nursing degree and a man's dialysis and a funeral. And those things happened, and they mattered. The lesson is set the number before you set the feeling. Say it out loud. Say it early. And understand that a request being genuine has nothing at all to do with whether you can afford to keep granting it. Stories like Dwayne's are why we put our guide together. Everything we've learned from the men who've sat down and told us what went wrong, all in one place. It's in the description if it's something you need. If this one landed with you, leave a comment. Somebody out there is 11 weeks into a conversation right now and reading them. Take care of yourselves out there. This has been Inside the Philippines.